Hi everyone, I'm Kate, the host and producer of PodRocket, and this is PodRocket FSJam Mashup. I'm here with Anthony and Chris. Hi guys.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's going great. Really happy to be doing this with you. This was originally my idea, and so I'm really glad you were into it and wanted to do it. I'm such a huge fan of the show and really wanted to get together and just talk about, podcasting and life and whatnot and all the good stuff.
And
all the good stuff.
Turn up like usual and talk like a crazy man.
So maybe if you guys just introduce yourselves. I listen to FSJam, but just for PodRocket listeners, maybe who don't.
Yeah, absolutely. I am also host, and I would say probably producer is a good term. I edit the episodes and tend to reach out to guests. It's not a completely 1-0 split, but there's definitely, I would say I probably spend more time kind of on the back end doing logistical stuff. And I'm just so passionate about this thing. It's really kind of like the one zone that I feel like I have kind of more autonomy over, like doing Step Zen and Redwood stuff. They're awesome. They're like huge teams, but they're not really like my thing. They're like, Tom and Anand's thing. So it's cool to like have your own thing and have kind of quote unquote creative control over. So I just love podcasting and love listening to your podcast. And I think this will be a really fun conversation.
A hill to die on, you may say, or a hill to put a flag on, whichever term suits you. My name is Christopher Burns. I'm CEO and co-founder of a company called everfund.co.uk, and we help charities and non-profits make donating easier through a suite of tools. Magical.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's really exciting. It's awesome to have you guys on. So PodRocket is a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. And we have explored topics outside of web development, but we are a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. Kind of in the early stages, I listened to a lot of FSJam. I remember listening and, kind of we were thinking like, could we do this? Is it something that's feasible for us? I listened to a lot of FSJam, a lot of Syntax, a lot of different podcasts in the space.
That's cool. Yeah, I realized neither of us actually said what FSJam is. So FSJam is about full stack Jamstack. So if you know what Jamstack is, you're like, whoa, it's like Jamstack with a database. Okay. And it started around Redwood.js originally. I kind of had the idea that we would bring on Redwood.js core team members and then Redwood.js contributors and community members, and then we would kind of expand out from there. And immediately we started talking to other people in the community, like Brandon from Blitz, who's also been on PodRocket, and lots of other people who are doing similar things, like the Echobind team. We've had a ton of them on, and there was just like so much stuff happening in the space. And we started talking to Prisma and Fauna and people from Amplify, and there's I just personally wanted to know so much more about these projects and these people. And I started reaching out to people that I was interested in talking to. And it's been kind of like a very curated set of projects. But there's so much overlap between our guests and PodRocket's guests. You also bring on lots of founders and talk about business stuff as well. So I think there's just a lot of overlap, and anyone who is kind of into one, I feel pretty comfortable recommending the other, because if you like one, you'll probably like the other.
I still remember the day I kind of coined it. And obviously by coining it, I heard it. I think Tom said it once, but he didn't really put the acronym of FSJam. I was like, I'm going to make a Twitter account and I'm going to start something. And I did. I called it FSJam. It was pink and white because I was like, what colors do we not see in the developer community? I know, pink. That's the perfect color. And then obviously I started talking to Auntie. Auntie was like, I'm really interested to do something. At this point, we didn't even want to do a podcast. That wasn't the first thing we thought of. We thought of a more overarching community kind of goals. Have a forum, do your standard 2010 web things. And then it was that thing. Anthony said to me, do you want to do it as a podcast? I was like, yeah, let's give it a go. And we just went from there. And it was such a interesting experience, as I've never done a podcast before, but I've always listened to them myself. Anthony's obviously done quite a few, so he's obviously much better in that area. And we've just gone on, and we've built from nothing to where we are now. And every episode, I think, has brought something unique to the table. And to me personally, every time that I think about a challenge that I have to solve now, I think about a lot of time, who have I spoke to on my podcast? What have they been solving? And can I just use their thing instead of building it myself?
Totally. I mean, that's the goal of this podcast for sure. And then hopefully, you know, people who come on are motivated to keep coming on and share what they're working on. Definitely. Okay, so I want to talk about like the first, like beginning of FSJam. So, you know, you kind of touched on it. I guess, you know, like maybe Anthony, like, had you done other podcasts, you're like, oh, I can do this? Or I guess like what was kind of like the, like, okay, how do I actually, you know, record the audio, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, this is where having a music background actually came in really handy, because I'm familiar with recording technology in general, just because like I've been in studios for years and years and years. So I have a music degree for people who don't know. And I did a podcast with one of my old music professors, Stuart Sims, and it was called the Loose Filter Podcast. And you can still listen to it if you want to. I have like, you know, 20 or 30 episodes I did with him. And that started back in 2015. And it was the same deal where me and Stuart did everything ourselves. So he already had a whole system. He had a TypePad website, if you know what that is. And they would go up on SoundCloud. And so it was like a really old school kind of podcasting setup. But it was great because you learn the process of recording the episode, editing the episode, and then uploading it, writing show notes, including links, all that kind of stuff. And so I did that for many years with him. And then I've also been a guest on many podcasts because I listen to so many podcasts. So as I was coming up in the web development space, I was reaching out to people like Brian Douglas and like Drew McClellan and all these people who have their own podcasts. And the real big difference was like, how do you actually host this thing? And that's where we started using Transistor, and Transistor is just an amazing podcast hosting platform. Pretty sure you all have like your own kind of custom thing that you're doing just through LogRocket. I'm actually kind of curious to hear about that a little bit. But the whole kind of end-to-end process I was already familiar with, so it made it easier. Not really reaching out to guests, that was kind of the one thing, but it's like once you have a platform, like once we had Tom on, I feel like it was a lot easier to kind of get other people on, because we could point to like, oh yeah, we had the creator of GitHub on our podcast. So then other people are like, oh, okay, it must be a real podcast then. Right. And just like it kind of snowballed very quickly once we got a couple kind of key guests on.
The most crazy thing about it was I was recently catching up with a friend who doesn't really keep up with what I do in the web development life. She's more of a machine learning, medical computing. I'm like, oh, did I tell you I have a podcast? And I'm like, oh, really? Like, I was like, yeah, you'd never guess who's been on. So like, what do you mean, who? I'm like, co-founder GitHub. She's like, GitHub, the platform I use every day. It's like, yeah, like, yeah, he's a nice guy, and we speak to him about cool technology. And then I'm like, but here's everyone else. But they're almost as important to me, because to me, like Tom, yeah, he's a name that everybody knows and really helped the podcast get going. Everybody else that has been on since, sometimes I found their conversations have been so much more interesting in different aspects as what they've been built, their different opinions. Because when we speak to Tom, we all share the same opinion. Like, we all really like Redwood, and we really like building Redwood and using Redwood. So it all kind of feels the samey kind of vibe. But then I think some of the best episodes we've had is when we've had very different opinions, or maybe just don't even get it. And the more I talk to people, the more they say about our Bitcoin episode. And I just have to say it because I think it's so funny, because I'll be honest, this is 100% truth. I hardly listen to the episodes because I can't stand my own voice. And the one I decided to listen to was the Bitcoin one. and with Noah, and Noah's a really great guy. I really enjoyed having him on. I listened to that episode and I felt like I was hitting myself with a brick over the head. But then every single person I've spoke to about that episode has said, you've asked all the questions that I'm just dying to ask, but nobody wants to ask the stupid questions because, we're all technology background. We're all developers. Surely we understand the blockchain and the uses of Bitcoin and what it really does and really mean and everything around it. So I like to say Anthony brings the sophisticated questions a lot of the time, and I bring the logical, stupid, like dumb questions that someone just really wants to ask.
That's great. That's excellent balance. I know I'm starting to see it more with podcasts. I just talked to Tracy Lee a couple weeks ago. That episode's going live this week. And her podcast Modern Dev just had a couple episodes on blockchain. And I was asking about that. And I see it more and more.
Her episode on blockchain I thought was really good.
Yeah. And she had a similar sentiment that it did super well, even though she isn't super familiar with it, but it did really well.
You already talked a little about the origins of PodRocket, but is there anything more there you wanted to share in terms of like whose idea it was, like anything like that?
Yeah. Thank you for asking, Anthony. So, I mean, if you go back in the early episodes, like you can definitely tell that we were learning kind of as we were going. Like this time last year, we were trying to just see if we could do it. I was actually Googling like how to record audio. Like that is the stage we were at, how to record audio most effectively. We did buy equipment specifically for this podcast. And we were just like, could we do it? Our first episode was with Fred Schott, on Snowpack. And then we also had like a second segment, with Kalen, our front end engineer, and he was talking about Webpack. And so we kind of like jammed those two together. And then I actually edited it in GarageBand myself. It took me like 2 days. And it was really challenging. But then we, passed it around, put it on SoundCloud, did some feedback with some listeners. And yeah, people were like, yeah, it's interesting. The biggest feedback was like audio quality could improve, which we already knew. And yeah, so that was kind of like how it started. Before that, or like kind of like how the idea came to be was, we were kind of experimenting with different types of content. So the LogRocket blog is very well known. If you haven't read it, go check it out.
Fantastic. LogRocket blog is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And at LogRocket, that's definitely like something we're super, super proud of. And we were kind of, like, okay, we have written content down. What else could we do? We tried YouTube videos, like YouTube tutorials, and we just kind of weren't seeing, what we wanted to see, I guess. And so we were like, well, maybe we can try, a podcast. And we were actually doing this at like during the pandemic. So it was kind of everyone was doing a podcast. So you're like, I guess we can start doing a podcast. So that's how it really kind of started. And now we're at like 60 episodes. We publish twice a week. So it's really been fun, and we've really like scaled production pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm kind of jealous actually, because you have been like outrunning us in terms of the episode numbers. Even though we started a little earlier, you've already gotten more of them because, as you say, you do 2 a week. And I am like such a control freak about like the editing, and spend probably like between 5 and 10 hours editing every episode. So it's like a huge time sink for me. And you've brought on like guests that I was already wanting to bring on, but we just like can't get everyone on we want to get on because there's just like only so much time in the day. But it's great that you have a team that kind of can support you and like help you really scale this.
Yeah, so I don't actually edit them anymore, so that helps a lot. We have a great sound engineer. His name's Craig. We give him shout outs all the time on here. Hi, Craig. And so he edits, which is super helpful because, like I said, when I edited it in GarageBand, it literally took me like 2 full days.
It's the unsung hero of podcasting.
It really is.
I am very thankful of Anthony doing it because I think if I had to do it, I wouldn't know where to start. And the reason I say that is because, we actually bought the microphones ourselves. I bought one off Amazon, and I think Anthony did as well. But the one I bought, and this is honest to God, a true mistake that I'm saying on air, is like, and Anthony's going to laugh at this, is I didn't know that microphones had different directions that you meant to speaking to them, right? So for the first, I think we're on like 50 episodes now. We're on 50 episodes. So I think for the first 40 or like 45, I was speaking into the top of my microphone when I actually needed to be speaking into the side of my microphone. And I just completely didn't notice until this one time I was just playing around with testing the sound and I was listening to it and I stood up by accident. I was like, wait, what? and then it was like the biggest moment. I was like, why didn't I think of that? Like, of course it's different because I think I got so used to seeing everyone else's microphones with them speaking into the end that I was just, oh, of course it's like that. Like, of course you do that. Without realizing that obviously I'm not an audio technical person and each microphone is very different.
yeah. That's actually really, Kalen, our front end engineer who comes on, and hosts, he was actually using it was actually backwards. So he's talking in the back of the microphone for like a good portion of season 1. So you're not alone.
Yep. I'm definitely talking into the front. I just had to check because that would have been a second like, oh my gosh moment. No, I'm definitely talking into the front and the right side. I can see the logo and I'm pretty sure that's right.
Yeah. So let's talk about, kind of what podcasts influenced us, podcast hosts. We touched on it. I definitely was influenced by you guys as hosts, for sure on FSJam. Obviously, Wes and Scott on Syntax. We just had them on. We kind of talked about, their process with Syntax. I think, you guys, as well as Wes and Scott, they both are, both podcasts kind of bring in like your personalities as hosts and, you're just so involved in like so many different things. That it's really authentic. And I think, we have a little bit different style, but I think ultimately like what we want is authenticity and, we want curious people to, walk away with, entertainment, but also like technical stuff. And I think you guys do a really good job of that.
Yeah, you definitely bring your personalities to it as well. I'm usually kind of like laughing at some stuff because you guys have some pretty funny comments as you're going, and it's very like true to life as someone else who's like a technologist. Like, there's so many weird specific things about working in this area that once you're in it, like you're kind of like in on the joke. But it's really cool to kind of get to listen to that kind of stuff. For me, like, part of why I wanted to start a podcast is because I listened to so many podcasts. Like, as I was learning to code in between when I was a music teacher and when I was like an actual dev, like I kind of gave up on music, like full stop, and just started driving for Uber to like make ends meet. And so I used to listen to about 8 hours of podcasts a day just because I was like working, driving, and that's just like what I did. And it was a great way to kind of continue to try and like learn that skill set while like having so little time. And so I'm like so thankful for podcasts for existing, period. And Software Engineering Daily was really a big one for me. And Jeff Meyerson, who, for anyone who is following him, may know he's been kind of having like a rough time lately, but he's on the mend now for anyone who's curious. And that show is just like so pivotal for me. It's been around for 6 years, has close to 2,000 episodes now. I would guess to me, there's nothing else even comes close to it. So huge respect for Jeff and everything he's built. And then the devchat.tv empire that Chuck has built. He has like 10 shows, JavaScript Jabber, React Roundup, Views on View, a whole set of others. They're great. They have a panel as well. And what I enjoy about FSJam and PodRocket as well is you have multiple hosts. So it's not quite a panel, but you still have like guests who come on, but you have more than one host just asking questions. So it's hard to keep the variety going and make sure you ask all the questions you need to ask with just one person. They have to really do their research well. But if you can kind of split the difference and have a couple people asking questions, you can usually cover a wider sphere of important stuff. And then React Podcast, Michael Chan, who I'm now good friends with, is another pivotal one for me, and that I've listened to a lot and just love his style and love how much he just like is able to get into like the psychology of his guests and like really kind of get the interesting questions out of them and being able to like speak to them and bring out, you know, what you really want to know about them. Because, you know, some people are kind of closed off, especially if they're like, you know, kind of dev people, and maybe kind of hard to get them comfortable. So that's actually a really important part of this process as well, making sure they're comfortable enough to like speak freely. And that can be a hard thing to do as well.
I think, Anthony, your story has been so not so well. It's so incredible how far you've came from even the start of doing FSJam. As you just said, you were doing Uber at the time, listening to so many podcasts. You know, you don't have a university degree like I do, or you know, been doing it as long. But the amount of knowledge and wealth, as in knowledge wealth, not wealth, you have gained. Like, you can say things that even I don't even know. I'm like, why do I not know this? Like, yeah, you can just say what the theory is or the paradox is or the like math things, and it's because you're like a knowledge sponge when I'm more like a knowledge drain, like a tap. You know, and I think it's so cool to think that, as you said, everything you've done, every podcast you've done, every article you have wrote has took you a step by step further into the role and position you are today. And yeah, you know, I think the reason I started doing things with Anthony in the first place was because the articles he was writing were pretty rad, even back then.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate that. It means a lot.
I know.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you know, when we first interviewed you, Anthony, and I was doing some research, and you were like, yeah, I was working, you know, I was in the code boot camp, and then I just like joined these communities and just started doing documentation and just got involved. And like, I did a code boot camp, and honestly, like, it didn't even cross my mind to just like go start doing stuff. Like, it literally did not even. I think, you know, getting your story out there about, you know, just getting involved is really cool.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really hard to, when you're in that position, you're still learning and you don't even understand the tech yet. Like, having that foresight to like go out into a community and start meeting people and networking, like it's so daunting, and there's so much happening. You can't even know where to go. So this is where listening to the podcasts came in really, really handy, because I already knew what Redwood was because I heard Tom give 5 podcast interviews about it, you know? So that's why I'm always so like excited about giving back and by putting these episodes out into the world. Because like, someone might listen to an FSJam episode and like learn about a project that they want to get involved in. I think that is like so important to put this content out into the world for other people who are looking for their niche to find.
And to be fair, you can say me and Anthony came together from a podcast, because I too listened to Tom talking about Redwood.js on a podcast and was like, this is pretty good. I should learn some more. And obviously we both joined the Redwood community at pretty much the same time. And it just went from there, to be fair. I still use Redwood. Anthony still works with Redwood. And the podcast is on strength to strength. My podcast that I listen to, well, I've got an interesting few. And I'll say this because, one, I'm a founder. So the first one I would say is called Build Your SaaS, and it's by the Transistor guys, Justin and John. And they talk about how they've built their SaaS product, how they've bootstrapped it, a lot of it. It's a lot more about the theory of doing it, the emotion of building it, than this is what technology we've used, because they've used completely different technology stacks to us and at Everfund, and everything they say I still relate to. So it's a lot more of a emotional connection as a podcast for me. And then my favorite podcast ever is ATP.fm by Marco Arment, John Siracusa, and Casey Liss. It's an Apple podcast. I've literally listened to it religiously for like 3 years, I think. Every episode listened to, and they just talk about Apple. I would say I'm an Apple fan, but I more listen to it for their connection and their banter and what they speak about than actually the products, if that makes sense. And my final one, that this was when I knew I liked podcasting before podcasting, is The WAN Show by Linus Media Group. That's been going on for like so many years, like 5-6 years. And this was when I was back in university. Because they were on Canadian time and they live streamed it. It's always been a video kind of podcast, but they do release it as a podcast. I've always watched it live, on talking about the latest technology, talking about their thoughts on it and how everything goes about it. And all three of them are not actually JavaScript related. I've hardly ever listened to JavaScript podcasts. Why? I think it's because I work on it every day, that I think listening to it as well would annoy the hell out of me, because I'm like, I already know this. This makes me want to cry. I dealt with this problem at work and now I'm going to listen to a podcast about it. Or I am dyslexic, and sometimes when I try to listen to podcasts while I'm coding, and sometimes they say pseudocode, and I'll start writing their pseudocode by mistake, and it's like, wait, no, I'm trying to do my thing.
Yeah, I too have had that. You're like listening to music and then you're like typing lyrics. Cool. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about community, building a community. Redwood.js, I think, does a great job. I guess, what are you guys doing kind of with FSJam community, or, any communities that you're involved in?
I think we're not very good at community building. We have a Discord that is completely dead and is just kind of there to like post episode updates. I would really like to invest more in the FSJam Discord. It's just hard because I'm already doing like a million things, so I really can't put more on my plate at this point. So it's hard to kind of like think of, like a quote unquote strategy for our Discord. So it's just kind of there. People join. Hopefully it's nice to get a kind of bump from that. If you're not like on Twitter, it's a good way to keep up with new episodes and stuff like that. So that's kind of the extent of it right now. I think one day I may like try and dig into that more, but unfortunately I just don't really have the time for it,
I think talking about, how full is your plate is a really big thing, because obviously so many times we have spoke to each other and said, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do this. And obviously Anthony's a developer advocate for StepZen. I'm running my own company, and you just get so lost in your work that you think, oh, I needed to post that episode. Like, we've been putting all of the episodes on YouTube, that literally every single episode is lined up to be put on YouTube. And we said to each other, this is really recent, okay, we'll release them daily. So that's just me going on at 5 p.m. each day and clicking like publish. And it was just too much because I've been so busy doing everything else, chucking water on fires sometimes.
And you said you were going to release it daily. I said, why do you want to do them daily? You're not going to be able to keep up with that.
Yeah. So maybe in the next week, there's probably going to be a massive dump that's just like, here's all of them. Because surprisingly, people do listen to them through YouTube as well. They're not video, just the audio. But it's that thing. To me, it's just making the podcast accessible wherever it is. I think YouTube's actually a really interesting medium for podcasts, because some podcasts choose to only put up like the clips, like say the highlights of the episode, when others put on the full episode. I don't know which one's better, but I feel like some people have their choices.
It's important to also point out that YouTube transcribes and then SEOs your episodes. So that's why uploading something to YouTube can actually be super interesting, because it makes it more searchable in a way that like podcasts is this huge, like open dead zone of content that doesn't get indexed in the same way. So this is one of the reasons you want to put your shows on YouTube, just because it will transcribe it automatically and then put it out there. And like that's actually something I was curious about with PodRocket, because you guys do transcripts. So how does that work exactly? You have an actual person sit down and write them?
We use Rev for our transcripts. So we just upload the file and then they do it for you.
So they probably so they do everything. So they probably have their own process where they will auto transcribe it and then have a person go over it. That's pretty much the only way. There's still no software, as far as I know, that can actually transcribe technical content correctly without a person going over it.
Yes, and you actually can do the just like automated, and then or you can do automated and have someone go over it for you. And because like words like SQL or like kind of like the tech words that like grammatically it's correct, but when it's a company or a brand, it's not correct. That stuff, definitely gets tricky.
And then do you all have a community around, like you have a LogRocket community, I'm assuming, so you probably kind of feed that all into there.
So we actually, we don't have a Discord or forum for the podcast specifically. I mean, I'm trying to make sure, I'm constantly checking Twitter. I'm not really posting on Twitter unless it's our episodes, but I'm definitely checking Twitter a lot and, looking at web dev stuff. I mean, we really just rely on like our guests to like share and, share all the episodes. Definitely something we probably could be doing more of for PodRocket specifically, but I actually talked about this with
LogRocket community, though, is what I'm curious about.
We don't have a Discord for LogRocket either. A lot of our community actually, really is like the blog. We're pretty like we encourage everyone to like comment in the blog posts, and this community really like is very vocal. So like if there's people are curious about something more in a blog, or curious about something, or they're like, hey, this I tried this and it didn't work. Everyone really is super active, I think, in our blog comments.
Well, I would hang out in a LogRocket Discord if you ever make one.
Yeah, definitely. We've talked about it, but yeah, and I actually talked about this with B. Dougie on our episode, and actually I think, unfortunately, I don't think we were recording when I talked about it with him, but he kind of said the same thing. Like he's like, everyone just has a Discord that's just like a ghost town just sitting there, and that's like a really big thing, a really big need in like communities right now.
Yeah, I watched him build up open source over this last year. That was one of the first Discords I ever joined, and it was a ghost town for many months, and it's not anymore. And there's like, you can't point to a thing that he did that made it not. Like it's a whole holistic process of like always bringing yourself to it and just engaging with the people who do show up, and then out of that whole set of people who show up, a small subset of them continue to stick around, and it's so hard to like make a quote unquote strategy around this stuff. Like it's partly just about being genuine and just showing up and doing the work,
Totally. Yeah. It's like tough to have, metrics around it. Like you said, strategy, plan, anything like that. So, but I do think, we're seeing more and more of it. I think, since I started working at LogRocket, which is, over 3 years ago, I think, you see more, people starting communities, and you see more like titles of like community manager, community management, that sort of thing.
Yeah, this next one I'm really curious to get into, because we're going to talk about like how do we prepare for episodes. And I remember when I was on your show, I said you were the most prepared person I've ever seen on a podcast in terms of like getting an outline and asking questions and pulling together material. This is where I know our shows are polar opposite. This is not advice I would necessarily give to a podcaster, but me and Chris show up totally blank. We never have an outline. We show up, and me and him know the type of stuff we want to ask, and we know the general outline of things we want to get into, but we have never written an outline for a show, and you have very thorough outlines for your show. So this is like a big difference between how we approach these things.
I honestly think it's crazy. Not that you've got an outline. No, that's pretty cool. I mean that me and Anthony, we normally one of us is normally more knowledgeable in the subject area than the other one. So we normally, just let whoever knows more play it. But then it tends to be this point of whoever knows more, it's like, what are they going to do? Are they going to advocate it, or are they going to grill it? Because it normally goes one way or the other. And I'd like to say I like to grill even the things I know, because sometimes I feel you can be fluffy duffy and ask the easy questions, But recently we was on a podcast with Aldo, who's building Lamb Dragon. And he was like, before the podcast, he went, ask me the tough questions. I was like, are you sure you want the tough questions? Because I'll ask the really tough questions. And I did. And he was like, yeah, it kind of sounds like a grilling to a certain extent, but it's only because it's kind of the critical questions that I think sometimes people want to hear. In terms of planning these questions, a lot of them just come to my head while I'm listening to the conversation. Normally, with both of us that have 100% at least read like either the documentation, the website, and then, you know, sometimes
or even have been building with it for like, months or even a year at a time. So that's the thing, is we tend to bring on projects that like we are already personally invested in. And so we have this huge backlog of knowledge about a thing already just because we use it. We use it day to day, you know, and that's why we bring the people on to talk to them about it. So we have questions that only come through the experience of working with the technology.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I think that's why, you're able to like just jump into a podcast and talk about it because you are like in it and use it. And I think like I'm just kind of a really prepared person anyway, but I think like I just want to make sure that, we're asking like what people want to know about it. And so I do a ton of research actually before each guest. And there's some that I do, like some I do more research than others, but I'm usually like reading documentation about whatever they want to talk about. I'm listening to stuff, the podcast that they've done before. And like, I also want to make sure that we're not asking like the same questions over and over again. Even though there's like kind of general questions you have to ask, like, tell me about this thing and like how it technically works. I just kind of want to make sure that we're not like, tell me more about, this thing that you've talked about 100 times. And, Wes Boss was just on and he was saying like, he's told his, coding story 100 times. And while he'll tweet it out, whatever episode asks him, like he's not sure if people still want to, kind of keep listening to that. So
well, that's an interesting one though, because like we had Sebastian Lorber on recently from DocuSource, and when we asked him like his getting started coding story, he said no one had ever asked him that before. And it was like the first time he ever had the chance to tell it. So that's why we kind of bake that into the point where almost every guest we have them tell their getting started story, because we have people who have never done a podcast before. And I reach out to people specifically who I know are doing good work and who may not be quote unquote podcast people, because I know that they have an hour's worth of things to say, like regardless of whether they've done a podcast or not. And those are the people where you want to make sure you give them the space to tell their story, because they have literally never told it before in a public forum.
Totally. Yeah. And we talk about this in the podcast too, kind of like, it seems like there's, with like dev advocates, there's kind of like a group of people who like, they've been on like 10 podcasts, so it is great to like also reach out to people who, haven't been on as many podcasts, and hear their stories as well. I think it's really all about, kind of, what you want to get out of each episode and, who you're talking to, what they're excited about. That's a huge factor also too of like the outcomes of our podcast.
Yeah, and I think personally some of my favorite episodes of FSJam have actually been the products that I've used every day. That like one of the ones that comes up to the top of my head is React Query, the Tan Stack. I was gonna say his name, and I was like, I know his name. I'm going to say it, and then my head went, don't mess it up. Tyler Lindsley.
Tanner Lindsley was on PodRocket as well, actually. The talk about
and this was something that I used every day, and obviously Anthony had looked at, never read, never really used properly, and I was so enthusiastic for that episode, loved every second of it. And then there's some of them that completely surprised me with their guests, like Peter Cooper. Really interesting guy, runs half of the network of newsletters, and it's just such an interesting story that you wouldn't know if you didn't interview these people. And he had never done a podcast before, but he runs half the newsletters on the internet.
He definitely done podcasts before. He was on Screaming in the Cloud with Corey Quinn just like a month before we interviewed him.
There you go. Don't trust me
I
as
would
facts.
love to have him on.
Opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great episode. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. One of the cool things that I enjoy about doing this is you get to see trends. Like, and for us, we're mostly interviewing people who are working on dev tools. And Swix put out a tweet recently saying that like you like fart on a dev tools company, you get $5 million or something like that. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was just like dev tools is just blowing up right now. We bring on so many dev tools companies, so that's really the big trend I see, and just like developer advocates and content creators are kind of driving this in a lot of ways. So I see them as kind of like, there's this term thought leader and then influencers. I prefer to call myself a thought fluencer personally. And so this is where I think you have a huge intersection of new things, people who want to know about the new things, and like how they can kind of work with each other. So that's mostly like the trend I see from FSJam, but I'd be curious kind of what trends you see having done PodRocket now for close to a year.
Yes. So definitely, we've seen that too, like dev tools. We talk to a lot of people like in open source. And I think, kind of the biggest trend is like talking a lot about like tools that are like the performance of tools, I think is definitely what we've, been talking about a lot. It's interesting, I think, kind of some of our most popular episodes were like kind of unexpected. I think, we talked about this a little bit, but our Rust episode actually did really well. And
people love Rust. People really love Rust.
So that was cool to see. Solid.js, we just had Ryan on pretty recently. So
yeah, we got Ryan coming up. I listened to that episode and immediately reached out to him and said, we need to get you on the podcast.
It was kind of like good timing, I think. And because actually even we just had Rich Harris on, and he was like, oh yeah, I saw you guys had Ryan on. So like, I don't know if he listened to it, but I was like, oh, that's cool. So yeah, I think kind of tools that are, yeah, like, I don't know, not different, but kind of like different, but the same, I guess. A lot of what Ryan talked about was, kind of pulling stuff from other, what he pulled basically what he liked from other frameworks. And I think people kind of like to hear, if you have something that works for you and it's cool, like people like to hear kind of like why, and, what parts are you pulling from? Like, where did you get that idea? That sort of thing.
What trends are you seeing, Chris?
My headphones are dead, so I'm secretly charging them, but I can't hear out my headphones. But when I say this is off the cuff, this is very off the cuff. I'm very sorry. I'm going to unplug them, and they're going to come back on with 20% instead of 0 now. What trends am I seeing? That's a really good question, because I'm a very shiny person, as in I like shiny objects. Something interesting. I love the risky ones with less than 100 stars on GitHub. They really get me going half the time. Like, ooh, what is this that I've just found on GitHub with less than 100 stars? Yes, let's use it in production. That's what I like to hear. And only if it's useful. I don't just stick anything in production just to say. Put my headphones back the right way. I think the biggest trends that I see is that there's a lot of things that have exponentially grown and became so much easier for developers to just abstract away. For example, we're seeing a dev tool for everything from like literally your VS Code to, production. There's now a dev tool for every single action that you can probably take in development. There's a dev tool that will try and automate that in some way and make it easier for you, or do some things, from your VS Code. It's now Code Sandbox, Gitpod, to literally production that's versatile. And I still think there's so much room to go. In terms of actually what's actually, I think, the most useful out of all of it, it's focusing less on the things that don't matter necessarily to you as the developer. I like the example I like to do is really bring up Stripe in this area, because Stripe are like known as this, 5 lines of code to create a billing app, right? But it's not actually 5 lines of code. It's 5 lines of code to take a payment, but to actually like build the infrastructure is like, I want to view my invoices, I want to sort out my refunds, I want to do all these other things. They've spent a lot of money on that with Stripe Checkout, but half the time I would just say go use Chargebee or Billflow, because it's 3 lines of code that you actually add to your app and it's completely done for you. Some developers probably would say, well, I want to spend £2,000 on writing all of that myself. But one of the biggest things that were actually brought up recently in a meeting I was in was a different startup that have spent thousands of pounds on doing it the AWS way, and 2 people have probably actually used it, instead of just doing the cheaper way, the faster way, because it's that thing. There's so much work to actually build a payment platform, and what's the point in building it if nobody's going to use it? So you should just use a service that has a free tier to just get going. And it's like that for me with 90% of the dev tools. Anthony knows, because Anthony laughs at this, but if it's a tool that's going to save me time or money or even responsibility, as in like I can just offload it to them, I'll probably use it, because I've got a lot to do. So the less I can do, the better. And
Well,
that's why I love dev tools.
And that's where it's great having you as like an advocate for other people who are trying to build things. Is you're like, I'm trying to do something real here. Like, I got a company, like we're trying to make money. Like you have real actual actionable goals you're going for. And that's why you ask the pointed questions. Like, you're able to say, I don't care how quote unquote cool or hip this thing is. Like, does it solve a problem? And then does it solve my problem specifically?
Yeah.
And so having that kind of like pointed question at whatever your use case is, it really helps focus the conversation. That's one of the things I really appreciate about having you on the podcast.
And I think it's that thing that, devs, we love to say, we've rewrote it 20 times to be as small and as fast and as everything as possible with no new functionality. Yeah, it's probably the same the first time. And the first time would probably make you money. And the amount of enterprise apps that I've seen recently that are just like, as I say, oh my gosh, why are people using Bootstrap and jQuery in 2021? Like, oh my, this makes me seriously want to be sick. But they make tons of money. Why? Because they don't care about the technology. They just care about fixing and solving the use cases. And I think that's really important in every episode that we speak to, because when you're a developer and you have to make these decisions, what tools to use, how you're going to solve a problem, a lot of the time you have to explain why you've chosen them choices to management or your boss or, your other co-founders in a startup of these are the choices I'm making. Yes, and I tend to find it's best to be as transparent as possible, saying, I don't know that area, but this is what I've listened to. This is what I know. It's easier to probably trust that company and just pay their bill than go make it myself. And I think that's a big thing in developer tools right now, is the lowering the barrier to entry to the point that anybody can get 90% of a SaaS startup made without using actually their own logic for most of it.
Yeah, totally. Okay, do we want to jump into 2022 trends?
Yeah. What is the future of our podcasts in general? I see so many companies now making podcasts. You mentioned here nHost has one coming up, which I didn't know actually. I follow nHost, so that's really cool. I'll definitely have to listen to that. Like, I see a lot of blockchain companies, they have their own podcasts as well. And so I think people see it as a useful medium, but it's hard to have a strategy around, going back to like our previous conversation about building community and stuff like that. So I I think that in general, most people know that it's a good medium, but it's hard to see the ROI on it unless you kind of are just like following people who are listening to it and seeing that engagement. So I'd be curious, like, how do you guys think about like ROI and like what you're kind of getting out of PodRocket in general?
Yeah. So it's definitely tough to measure. Metrics for podcasts are not super clear. And which makes sense because like you download it and then we lose track of it. But yeah, I mean, we're more thinking of just, kind of like how do we basically, the podcast kind of exists because, our blog is something that, we're so proud of, and it's so huge, and it's now such a big part of like our company. We're kind of, just more like basically just building a brand, being something that, people can rely on, being a resource for, basically all developers. So it's not really super quantified right now, but it's more just, build more brand building.
It's also about building relationships. I know for me, the network I've built through our podcast guests is the strongest network I have, and just being able to reach out to these different people and get them on and get to showcase their stuff, and then make sure the episode is good and goes out and represents them in a good way. Like, you get so much goodwill back from that, and you get to build so many connections and relationships with people through doing it. So for me, that's really where I see the ROI and the return on investment. And I think it's hard because it's a long-term play. It's an infinite game, not a finite game, if you're into that nomenclature. So to me, podcasting is just it's the ultimate infinite game. It's a really fun way to just get people together and talking, and then also having a really cool thing to put out into the world after the fact.
I think the biggest like ROI for me is when someone literally says, I've listened to I've listened to these episodes. I get that joke. I get that reference. Or when someone recommends it to somebody else, it's just like, people are actually listening to this. I still find that crazy because, yeah, I can see the statistics saying people are listening to this, but it's so different to see a number saying, this is how many downloads you have, to I'm a person and I'm recommending this to somebody else. It just is mind-blowing to me, as in people actually want to listen to these things, people actually enjoy listening to these things, and people actually learn things from these things. Is incredible.
Totally. Yeah. Do you guys get a lot of like responses on Twitter, like from your FSJam account?
Not a lot on Twitter. I find that mostly people who are into the show tend to reach out directly through like private channels and will like let me know that like, hey, like I really enjoy your podcast. I really enjoy listening to it. We've had a couple people tweet about it over the year or so, but it's also because I hang out in so many Discords, so I'm always like blasting it out to kind of the communities I'm in anyway, and I've like built up fans through like the React Podcast Discord or Open Sauce or the Redwood Discord, and people seem to really appreciate it and just like getting to be a fly on the wall for the conversations that we have. So again, it's really hard to measure, but I've gotten enough kind of face-to-face communication with people just saying like, hey, like I love your podcast, that that really keeps me going.
Yeah, I was just asking because we don't get a ton of engagement with our PodRocket Twitter account, but people will like tweet at me or Brian or Ben directly, which makes sense. I mean, it totally makes sense, but yeah.
I think the biggest question that's always on people's minds is when they recommend it. It's like, who's your favorite host? What's your favorite episode? What's your favorite part? Just tell me. Because obviously we see statistics saying like, this was the most downloaded episode, but what was their favorite episode? What was that moment where they was like, I actually quite enjoy this, Was it on the first episode? Was it on the 10th episode where they're like, I'm going to keep listening to this? What hooked them? What was their first episode? All that stuff I think is so, so interesting. that on anything in terms of analytics does not cover right now. You can't tell what someone's first episode was or their favorite episode, because to be fair, if you don't know podcasting, you can't even really tell how many subscribers you have. It's an estimate. They say, well, we're taking the averages of your last 3 downloads, and that's how many subscribers you have. But it's such a opaque industry. But it's always because it's been that bootstrapper industry, and people like Spotify come along saying we're going to dominate it, and they're not. In my eyes, they're still.
Well, it's because it's decentralized. It's an actual decentralized medium where you put your thing out on RSS feed. People choose to download it or they don't, and that's the only metric you get, is how many downloads you get into these random podcast players that are out in the world. That's what makes podcasts such a weird, interesting medium. Is it actually takes the fundamentals of the web and puts them to an audio medium. So you don't get good metrics on purpose because the thing is actually decentralized.
It's so easy to understand, right? It's just a decentralized network where each player is for themselves.
Like a blockchain. It's just like a blockchain.
Yeah. No, I was going to say with N-Host, I just saw that I think they have 1 episode out, which I just took notice, but I know that they just came on and they were on for, I don't think they were on for a Founder Friday segment, but they're pretty small.
You had Johan on, I think for Founder Friday, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. So, and usually like our Founder Friday segments are usually the companies are quite small. So, creating a podcast at that size is exciting. And I know, like, when I was hired on LogRocket, the company was pretty small. So, and I started on our blog, and it was exciting for me to say, like, oh, a company this size is prioritizing, content, and now specifically a company is prioritizing specifically like a podcast, which is, I think that's super exciting.
Yeah, I'll have to get on that one. I'll have to reach out to him. I talked to Johan a little bit. Like, N-Host, they have a whole Redwood integration. They're like, a GraphQL company. So obviously I'm very aware of them and big fans of what they do.
Yeah, you'll have to be a guest on there.
The open source Firebase alternative. Where have I heard that term?
But with GraphQL. Open source Firebase alternative with GraphQL. That's what makes them different from Supabase. Supabase doesn't have GraphQL built in.
Well, this is the thing about all these taglines, is, every product, every dev tool, the amount of time that's probably spent working out how to put what you do actually simply is such a hard thing. Like, this is React. Yeah, but what kind of React? There's 20 kinds of React. It's static site Reacts. Okay. The best static site generator in React, it's GetStream,
because you get a single sentence. You get 1 sentence to explain your thing, and they're like, if you can't explain it in 1 sentence, why should I even care?
Exactly. Why should I care? Why should I do this? And the best thing, and I think this is a trend I think we'll continue to see into 2022, 2023, is more open source companies where a lot of their main product and ISP is already open source, and then they tend to close source a cloud version. I think we'll see that a lot more going forward, and I think it will just continue to grow. But personally, I do have some like ethical questions to these things, where open source is this really great thing and anyone can contribute, but if this thing's going to make money, shouldn't the people that are contributing get paid? And there's a lot of them services just coming around that I think are really going to take off, because if it is a true open source alternative to X, then surely you shouldn't put a pull request in unless you're going to get paid for it, because the owners of it are probably going to be paid for it. But that's my personal two cents on this kind of open source software.
Yeah, I feel like we've had a couple guests. Seems like the last couple episodes have been kind of that open source model of open sourcing something and then having the cloud version or some other paid solutions as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for doing this with us. I really appreciate getting to chat about this stuff. So, and thank you for being such a huge supporter of FSJam. I've been a huge supporter of PodRocket. So it's really cool to get to kind of collaborate on some of this stuff. This is really fun.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for again. Yeah, this was your idea, so thanks for putting it out there. And we'll have to do this more often.
Maybe we can make it an annual thing, hey?
Yeah.
FSJam is probably going to have another annual episode near the end of the year. We definitely should, and we definitely could. The roundup of FSJam of 2021. Because I think it's so interesting, because I remember this episode and we said, what's going to happen in the next year? And everyone had their opinions, their own secret flavor of where it's going. And I think specifically with FSJam, we're really going to see if they've hit their goals, they're still working towards their goals, and what's going to happen next. What have they moved on to? I think it's going to be a super, super interesting area to catch up with people that have already been on the show before. What's 2022 for FSJam? Probably more podcasts with people that have been on before. What do you say, Anthony?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Almost everyone we've had on could come back and do a follow-up episode, because everyone who we've had on is continuing to do interesting stuff.
Definitely. Yeah. New versions. Always. Yeah. You can always talk about those. Great. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, guys. And really appreciate it.
Thank you.